Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. President Donald Trump prepares to travel to the Middle East to address a number of key global challenges, including new investments for the US economy. The visit comes as Hamas hand over US-Israeli hostage Edan Alexander, believed to be the last living American hostage. President Zelensky challenges President Putin to meet face-to-face in Turkey to discuss ceasefire plans. And Wall Street surges as the US strikes a trade deal with China. Now to our top story, and US President Donald Trump is embarking on a visit to the Middle East this week. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman will meet the US President when he arrives in Riyadh on Tuesday. President Trump will then attend a summit of Gulf leaders before travelling to Qatar and the UAE later in the week. I'm now joined by Robert Grenier, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency Counterterrorism Center. Robert, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. Firstly, what do you believe is the main purpose of President Trump's visit to the Middle East this week?
Well, as you just mentioned, this visit is all about deals. Deals, deals, deals. And it's going to be all about the letter T for trillions. President Trump wants to project to the American people that he, in traveling to the Middle East, through the sheer force of his personality, is going to be winning trillions of dollars worth of trade and investment deals from Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf sheikhdoms. And this will all help to drive the reindustrialization of the United States. And in that sense, it is of a piece with his tariff policy, which is designed to achieve the same end.
This trip comes during a particularly critical time. There have been many global breakthroughs pretty much in the last 24 hours, namely the Hamas hostage handover of Edan Alexander, the talks between Russia and Ukraine, the US-China trade deal. These are all very timely when the Saudi Arabia visit is just coming up, a country really credited with aiding the negotiation of big deals we've seen of late.
Yeah, well, I think it's again, this is all part of a further tightening of relations between the United States and Saudi Arabia. In particular, as we all know, Saudi Arabia played a significant role in the context of U.S. negotiations with Russia and with Ukraine. Several of those negotiations that took place in Saudi Arabia under the auspices of Mohammed bin Salman. And so, yes, I think this is an auspicious week for the U.S. and specifically for Saudi-U.S. relations.
And just talking about relations there, what's the relationship like between President Donald Trump and Saudi Arabia? And why has he chosen this as his first official foreign trip? He's called it historic.
Yeah, well, I think Donald Trump feels very comfortable with the Saudi royal family in particular. There is the public aspect to this, the government-to-government aspect to this, but there's also a private and family aspect to this. As we know, the Trump family is heavily involved in making deals in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, and in Qatar, all of which form some of the background to this trip. Again, part of the way to understand the Trump administration is that it is in many respects sort of a reality television show. And he likes the optics of being in the Middle East. He has a sort of cartoonish view, quite frankly, of Saudi wealth. And this plays into a popular perception in the United States. And again, going to the Middle East, walking on red carpets, seeming to be surrounded by opulence, he is projecting to the American people that he's generating all of this money, all of this investment in the United States, and that is a very good look for him.
But if we just turn away from the opulence and the investments for the United States, how will Trump's upcoming visit affect the ongoing conflicts? And will we see improvements in communication between the US and the Middle East following this week? Could we possibly see ceasefire talks emerge once again between Israel and Hamas?
Frankly, I doubt it. I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu has set his course in Gaza. It is a unilateral course. He's not looking for new negotiations. He's not looking for new agreements with Hamas. He wants to destroy Hamas, and he's set about to do that. And so I think that the U.S. has largely decoupled its policy in Palestine from its policy in the Middle East and with Saudi Arabia in particular. So I'm not looking for that. But I think overall, the atmosphere is a good one. The situation with Iran right now, Iran has been greatly weakened, as we know. Its so-called proxies in the Middle East have also been weakened. And so that makes it easier for the U.S. to reach some sort of a nuclear deal, and that is a deal which Saudi Arabia would very much be in favor of, at least at the current juncture.
Robert Grenier, former director of the Central Intelligence Agency Counterterrorism Center. Great to have your thoughts. Thank you for joining the show.
Most welcome.
Hamas have released US-Israeli citizen Edan Alexander, a 21-year-old believed to be the last living American hostage in Gaza. Alexander was serving in the elite infantry on the Gaza border when he was captured by Hamas during the October the 7th attacks. His family say they have received the greatest gift imaginable, knowing he will return home. Earlier today, President Trump spoke ahead of Edan Alexander's release. Here's a reminder.
And again, they thought he was dead just a short while ago. His parents are so happy. They're so happy. So it's, as you know, Edan's the only American citizen who's captured and held hostage by Hamas since October 7th, 2023. And he's coming home to his parents, which is really great news. I mean, to me, it's big news. They thought he was dead.
We can now go live to Tel Aviv to speak to our correspondent, Trent Murray. Trent, great to have you on the show. Right now, you're in Hostage Square. We know Hamas have released Edan Alexander. What's the atmosphere like right now, and what is the significance of this moment? Oh, apologies. We have lost Trent Murray, who was in Hostage Square with us. We will try to get back our connection with Trent. Trent, are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, Leigh-Ann. Thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Trent, thank you so much. You are currently in Hostage Square. We have now got details of the release of Edan Alexander. What's the atmosphere like, and how significant is this moment?
Well, Leigh-Ann, when the news came through that Hamas had handed over 21-year-old Edan Alexander to the Red Cross, there were cheers and applause here from many of the Israelis which have gathered here, including many family members of hostages, both current and former. Of course, this news did come quite quickly, with Hamas announcing it late Sunday that they were releasing what is thought to be the last surviving American hostage in the Gaza Strip. They say they are doing that as a gesture of goodwill as President Trump prepares to fly to the region with his trip to Saudi Arabia tomorrow. Of course, for many families here, there are some mixed emotions, I think it's fair to say. They are, of course, relieved that another hostage is returning, but they are also, I think, worried that now Washington has extracted its last surviving hostage. Will they continue to put more pressure on Hamas to release what is thought to be around 23 or so still being held in the Gaza Strip? So right now, everyone glued to that big screen there behind me, which is showing the latest pictures coming out of Gaza. We've seen those Red Cross SUVs driving. We've also just seen a photograph released by Hamas showing Edan Alexander with 3 Hamas fighters as well as a Red Cross representative. He will be taken to an Israeli army base near the border with Gaza. We expect in the next 30 minutes or so. He'll have medical checks done, reunite with some of his family members, and then be brought here to a major hospital in Tel Aviv for additional medical checks.
And Trent, Donald Trump spoke earlier. We know he will be in the region from tomorrow, and Hamas has also released a statement. What more do we currently know?
Well, we know President Trump appearing at the White House gave an update that indeed Edan Alexander was about to be returned here. He was born here in Tel Aviv, but grew up in New Jersey in the United States. He was doing IDF service here on October 7th at a border base very close to Gaza when he was captured by Hamas militants. He's been in their captivity now for 583 days. President Trump called this a momentous occasion and said that they no longer thought he was alive. We know President Trump has also spoken with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in recent hours. Israeli media is reporting that he has authorized negotiating teams to now dispatch to the Middle East to try and get a longer-term ceasefire to be implemented potentially. Hamas is also saying in the past hour or so that it is ready to be involved in negotiations to reach a comprehensive, sustainable ceasefire agreement. That will be news, I would imagine, that will be warmly welcomed by many families here, including, as I say, the ones of the remaining 23 or so. They are desperate to get them home. Many people here quite critical of the current approach of the Israeli government, saying only a ceasefire is going to get their loved one back home here.
Earlier today, you spoke with a cousin of one of the dead hostages. He told you what Israelis wanted for the future of the region. Trent, let's take a look at that.
The fate of the Israeli hostages is linked to the fate of the Gazans. I don't want to see any misery on the Gazan side. I don't enjoy seeing the Gazan civilians suffer. I don't think they deserve what they've gone through. But the only way to end the suffering is by bringing all the hostages back home, because once they're back home, that is the end of the war. That is the end of the Gazans' misery. That is the beginning of the reconstruction of Gaza. And hopefully what Witkoff is presenting today, it's also the beginning of a different future for this region, and both peoples deserve it.
Trent Murray in Tel Aviv, thank you once again for joining us. We can now get into this further with Daniel Rubenstein, former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Daniel, great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Our reporter spoke to a cousin of one of the dead hostages today. He said the solution to end this crisis is signing deals. But Netanyahu says no ceasefire and plans for an intensified military campaign continue. Is Israel's Prime Minister ignoring his people's wishes?
The people of Israel wish for two major things. One is the safe return of every hostage that remains in Gaza. Hamas is holding them in underground terror dungeons, torturing them, starving them. We want them home immediately, and we want the whole world to call on Hamas to release them. We also want the Hamas terror regime out of power. It was the Hamas terror regime that invaded Israel on October 7th, gunned down hundreds of people at a music festival, went house to house, massacring families, burning parents and children together. That regime cannot be allowed to survive this war because it pledges to keep doing this again and again until Israel is destroyed. So Hamas must go. and the hostages must come home.
How realistic is it that Israel can completely eradicate Hamas? I think this is a question a lot of people are asking. And also, Hamas has released Israeli-American hostage Edan Alexander. That was today. The group says they're hoping this will pave the way for a possible return to ceasefire talks. What do you make of this?
The reason that Hamas took hostages in the first place is so that it could urge Israel to release convicted Palestinian terrorists from Israeli prison, and so that Hamas could get away with the massacre. Hamas took hostages so that it could get away with gunning down hundreds of people at a music festival and going house to house and burning families in their homes. The reason that Hamas took hostages, the reason that Hamas holds hostages, is so that it can be in a position to do this again and again. The reason that removing Hamas from power has been a challenge is precisely because Hamas is holding hostages, and Israel wants to see those hostages come home safely. And therefore, Israel is open to negotiations that will see a peaceful end to this war where Hamas gives up power in exchange for allowing all the people of the region, Israeli and Palestinian alike, to have a better future than the one that Hamas has brought it now.
So Israel was not involved in the negotiations over the release of Edan Alexander. The deal was brokered by talks between Hamas, the US, Egypt and Qatar. Why was Israel not directly involved? And when was Israel actually informed of these details?
If Israel is not involved, then it would mean that Israel is not making any concessions in order to receive a hostage. That, in my mind, would be a good thing. But big picture, the President of the United States has said in the past that there will be all hell to pay if Hamas does not release all of the hostages. Hamas has not released all of the hostages, and President Trump is giving time for diplomacy to be an alternative and preferred method. Israel wants diplomacy to achieve the obvious result for all of humanity, which is that Hamas will not be in power and be in a position to carry out more massacres.
The US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is actually in Israel today. Donald Trump does arrive in the region tomorrow. As I mentioned, Hamas said today they want a way back to ceasefire talks. Do you think Israel is going to pause its military offensive and begin these negotiations and try and forge a path forward to save your hostages and save lives in Gaza?
It's been a year and a half since Hamas started this war, and a year and a half that Hamas continues to hold hostages. Israel has said that if Hamas releases hostages, then there will be a ceasefire for as long as Hamas continues to release hostages. Hamas cannot be allowed to drag on negotiations in order to achieve a stronger grip on power than it already has. So no, Israel is not going to allow Hamas to drag this out unless Hamas starts releasing hostages. It's ceasefire in exchange for hostage release, and final ceasefire in exchange for Hamas giving up power and allowing a more responsible government to take power in Gaza than the one that currently exists.
And a global hunger monitor is warning Israel's blockade threatens the entire population of the Gaza Strip, with famine and 50,000 people currently face starvation. Following the release of Edan Alexander, is Israel prepared to start saving lives in Gaza and stop blocking food?
Israel and the United States have been working on a mechanism that would see food enter the Gaza Strip that would not reach the Hamas terrorist army that is governing the Gaza Strip. This has been a big problem in the past, where Israel has allowed massive amounts of food and supplies to enter the Gaza Strip. Hamas, being the government of the Gaza Strip, gets its hands on these food and supplies, makes prices go up, and uses the revenue of the taxes that it takes to maintain its grip on power. So we're trying to find a middle ground where the civilians of Gaza will not pay the price of their government, the Hamas terrorist army. And that requires a new way of thinking that Israel and the United States are together trying to set up. And this process could begin very shortly, where we see more food and supplies entering Gaza, where people who are not part of Hamas can come pick them up, and that Hamas will begin to feel the pressure after a year and a half of war and decide that it's time to move on and allow a more responsible government to take power in Gaza than the one that is currently bringing us to this position.
Daniel, what exactly does that deal look like? Will it be done through private aid agencies? or will the UN facilitate with that?
From what I've heard, the United Nations and related aid agencies have said that they will not cooperate with the new U.S.-Israeli mechanism that is under discussion. As it has not been fully published, I don't know all of the details, but some of it has been published, and it's clear that there are new ideas for setting up zones in Gaza, allowing people to reach these zones to get the necessary food that they need, and keeping Hamas out of the picture so that Hamas cannot hijack the aid and sell it on the black market for very high prices, that it will then use the revenue to pay its fighters, to pay the people who are still holding hostages, and to prolong the war for longer and longer.
Daniel, just moving away from Hamas for a minute, does Israel recognize that people and children and families are starving to death due to this blockade, and there's no medical, there's nothing to help these people right now? Is that recognized by the Israeli government? Is there a concern about how these civilians are surviving?
There is a huge concern about the humanitarian situation in Gaza. For a year and a half, Israel has been hearing international aid agencies say that starvation is imminent, starvation is imminent. It's an exaggeration to say that there is mass starvation in Gaza. Certainly there is pressure on the entire population in Gaza. You just need to have a little bit of common sense and understand that the situation is because Hamas, the government of Gaza, decided to start a war against its neighbors, and its neighbors decided that they don't want to die. And they are not going to allow the free shipment of food and supplies to the Hamas terrorist government, which is using the revenue from the sales of the food and supplies to continue its war. We're trying to find a middle ground, a reasonable answer to this difficult humanitarian situation while Hamas is holding hostages and starving them. Hamas is starving the hostages that it is holding. The food that reaches Gaza, Hamas does not give it to the hostages. It's an unbearable situation. We need more pressure, not just on Hamas, but on Hamas's backers, specifically the royal family of Qatar, the regime in Qatar, which seem to have told Hamas just recently that it needs to free the American hostage. Qatar clearly could tell Hamas to release the hostages. It is not doing this. It is clear that Qatar told Hamas to keep the hostages until Hamas gets a deal that allows Hamas to remain in power. So let's shift some of the focus to Qatar, where Hamas's leaders are living quite comfortably, despite the fact that they engaged in a barbaric war crime on October 7th. They are living in Qatar comfortably. We need more pressure on Qatar to extradite Hamas leaders so that they can face trial for crimes against humanity.
Well, Daniel, Donald Trump will be visiting Doha in Qatar this week. I wonder if that will be a conversation topic that we'll see happen.
I'm not optimistic that it will be a conversation that we will see happen. I seem to be a minority voice on this that is screaming about the role of Qatar. Most people prefer to ignore it because Qatar has paid so many people to be in a position where it's beneficial to them to ignore it. But it's very clear that Qatar thought that the October 7th massacre was a good idea. On the afternoon of October 7th, Qatar put out a statement condemning Israel. Qatar said that Israel was solely responsible for the October 7th massacre, and Qatar has consistently taken grossly irresponsible positions that put everyone in danger and prolong the war. So I'm using the platform that you have graciously provided me to let your viewers know about the role that Qatar is playing. Qatar told Hamas to keep the hostages. Qatar is behaving like an enemy state, and I hope the whole world will...
Daniel Rubenstein, former aide to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm so sorry we couldn't carry on this conversation, but once again, thank you for your thoughts. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he is willing to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Istanbul this Thursday. It comes after European leaders urged Russia to agree a 30-day ceasefire with Ukraine after being threatened with fresh sanctions. Earlier, US President Donald Trump suggested he may also travel to Istanbul for the talks. Meanwhile, Zelensky says he's ready to talk and end the war. Take a listen.
I will be in Turkey this Thursday, May 15th, and I am expecting Putin in Turkey, personally. I hope this time Putin will not look for reasons why he can't do something. We are ready to talk to end the war. Thursday, Turkey. President Trump supported it all leaders support it.
We can now go live to Kyiv to speak to our correspondent, Stuart Smith. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us. Zelensky and Putin could be meeting this week. How did we actually get here? There's been a flurry of activity over the weekend.
Yeah, there have been all sorts of various diplomatic goings-on throughout the past few years, really, and months. But if we look to the most recent explanation for the latest developments, it goes back really to the end of April when President Putin of Russia suggested that there should be a 3-day ceasefire during Victory Day celebrations, which is when Russia celebrates the end of the Soviet Union's defeat and allies' help in defeating Nazi Germany. Now, Ukraine never agreed to that. President Zelensky was adamant that if President Putin is really serious about peace, then it should be a 30-day ceasefire. Nonetheless, Russia did say that it attempted to follow that ceasefire, and the skies of Ukraine were mostly clear of drones and missiles for that period, though both sides said there were thousands of violations. Then many Western leaders came to Kyiv on Saturday, the leader of the UK, France, Germany and Poland, to meet with President Zelensky here, where they reaffirmed that desire for a 30-day ceasefire, which then crucially was also supported by President Trump, meaning it was now for the Russian president to respond. Now, there was a very late press conference over the weekend that was around 1:30 a.m. Moscow time, where it was thought maybe the Russian president was going to agree to that 30-day ceasefire, but in the end, he didn't agree to that. He said there would still need to be other conditions before that happens, but he would be interested in talks in Turkey. And now President Zelensky says he's going to go personally. President Trump has suggested he might go too. The big outstanding question now is whether President Putin will meet leaders there, along with President Erdogan, or whether he would send a delegation of lower-level officials.
And Stuart, when was the last time that Putin and Zelensky actually met face-to-face?
It's a long time ago now, 2019, 2 years before the start of the latest invasion. This time, President Zelensky is more optimistic, but it's remarkable looking back when you see the kinds of issues they were talking about right then during what was called the Normandy format, when they were debating the separatist activities of Russian-backed troops in the east of Ukraine. They were talking about the recognition of Donetsk and Luhansk, the recognition of Crimea, trying to arrange a ceasefire, which they, in the end, did, but that ceasefire didn't last long at all. They did, though, manage to agree on some prisoner exchanges, so very similar issues, though as that debate showed, even though those negotiations did end up with a ceasefire, with the help of President Macron of France and the German Chancellor at the time, Angela Merkel, it did not result, as we know, in a long-term peace, showing that the difficulty of this. What may help, though, is President Trump looks like he's invested in this. He's called on President Putin to attend and has suggested he thinks the Russian leader will agree to a 30-day ceasefire.
Stuart Smith in Kyiv, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining us. Let's continue with this topic and bring in Ukrainian MP Kira Rudik. Kira, great to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me. Kira, the big question many people are asking today is whether face-to-face talks between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky will actually happen on Thursday.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. Well, as President Zelensky said, he will go to Istanbul. The question is, will Putin go? And we don't have an answer to that. It will not be the first time when Putin will not do things that he said that he will do. And I think right now, when the whole world is watching, the stakes are really raised up. So Putin either doesn't come in and show that he doesn't want to end the war, in fact, or he will come up and then he will have to actually answer to the unpleasant questions that I think President Trump can be asking. You know, we are in this impossible situation when the victim of aggression, Ukraine, has to prove to the whole world that it is aggressor, Russia, who doesn't want peace. And it is so unbearable, and especially when you have to explain what is going on to people who are fighting at the battlefield, people who are being attacked every single day. And so it's just incredible how the world turned from the clear picture when Russia is an aggressor and Ukraine is a victim to a situation when there is still a question of who doesn't want peace. Well, Ukraine wants peace. We are the most interested in that.
Trump has said in the last few hours that he believes Russia will agree to a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine during these talks in Istanbul. We have just been talking then. You said that right now you are in an impossible situation. So do you think Donald Trump's assessment of Putin's position is accurate?
I think the new administration and President Trump are still learning things that President Zelensky and all of us, we were trying to explain it beforehand, like the fact that we learned over the last 30 years that you cannot trust Russia, or if you have a deal with Russia, you have to have a very clear way of how you ensure it and have real checks and balances in place to what would happen if Russia will not accept it or will break their part. Because imagine Putin agrees to a ceasefire. Who will be assessing that? Who will be telling if they are actually going with ceasefire? And what would happen if Putin will still continue attacking our cities and attacking us at the battlefield and will be just denying that it was him? This is something that we have seen in the past, and we can prove it with the facts and with the international spectators. So the question would be not what you get people to agree to, but how do you ensure that it would work? How do you make sure that Putin will keep his part of the bargain? Before you know that, there is no reason in sitting down with him. And we hope that President Trump has something strong in his hands to be able to ensure if Russia will agree to something, they will keep up with that.
Putin has begun the 30-day ceasefire with a volley of drone attacks. That's according to Kyiv. Kira, is this a direct challenge to Keir Starmer and European allies who warned Moscow this weekend?
It is indeed. Once you are in a street fight, if you pull out a knife, you better be using it. So once the democratic leaders announced the set of the sanctions that will be applied to Russia and to their shadow fleet, if there would be no ceasefire starting basically midnight tonight, they need to be ready to go ahead with it. No matter what Putin says, no matter what additional offers he does, they were very strict in their statement. And at that moment, it seemed that President Trump was supporting them. So right now they need to show not only Russia, but basically the whole world that the Western democracies mean business. And we are really hopeful that they will be able to go ahead with those sanctions.
Kira, you know, ahead of these talks that are happening in Istanbul on Thursday, what is Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky prepared to give up in order to reach a ceasefire deal with Russia?
I think it's a wrong question of what the country that is defending itself should be giving up. I think the bigger question that we should be answering is how to ensure a peace. How do you make sure that Russia would not attack us? And then we can be talking about which particular territories will be protected by these security guarantees. As of right now, we haven't heard any single actually productive or practical way of ensuring that Russia will keep their part of the bargain. So this should be the first and foremost question in discussions. And then when you know what would be the way of protecting this deal, of making sure that it will go ahead, then we can be talking about, again, which territories will be under this protection.
Kira Rudik, Ukrainian MP, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you.
Now, the US and China have agreed to major reductions in tariffs imposed against each other in a dramatic dial down of trade tensions. Earlier today, President Trump talked about achieving a reset with China after weekend talks, with Wall Street surging as a result. The two countries have 90 days to work towards a broader deal. China says it is committed to the stable development of relations with Washington. Patrick Falk reports.
Well, there's no doubt about it. This was a significant step in the de-escalation of trade tensions between the world's two largest economies. The tone from both sides following the discussions over the weekend in Geneva were positive, and Chinese media reported earlier in the day that the two countries had reached a series of major consensuses before the details were released later in a joint statement. The combined 145% levies on most Chinese exports have now been slashed to 30%, including the rate tied to fentanyl by May 14th, and the 125% duties imposed on US goods have been slashed to 10% now. This goes much further than markets or investors had expected, and certainly takes a lot of uncertainty off the table for the time being, which a lot of economists have noted was really important, because despite the fact that both sides had been standing their ground, there was plenty of indication that the tariff war was really beginning to hurt both sides. But one of the reasons behind the breakthrough appears to have been the result of the way the negotiations were conducted. China's trade czar, He Feng, complimented the Americans on their professionalism and pragmatic approach to resolving differences. It's fair to say there was a lot of concern about that, and China had insisted all along on respectful engagement. And despite some of the provocative language and comments US President Donald Trump had used in the lead up to all of this, to the talks, things do seem to have hit the right notes. Crucially, that appears to have paved the way for an off-ramp and for both sides to be able to back down without losing face, as it were. But some experts are pointing out that this is likely to be viewed as more of a win for China. Perhaps it has exceeded expectations, as I say, and before the joint statement was made, there was an expectation that the two sides would be aiming to bring the tariffs down to something more like 60%, which in many ways would have been problematic, as many economists have pointed out, because even though that would have been a big cut, it wouldn't necessarily have moved the needle an awful lot in terms of impact. Now, there is still a lot of work to be done, and the big question is what exactly happens at the end of the 90 days now. Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, has suggested that it could be extended, but also indicated that that would be based on good faith and constructive dialogue.
Patrick Falk in Singapore, thank you. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said his country will not tolerate any kind of nuclear blackmail in the ongoing conflict with Pakistan. Addressing the nation earlier today, Modi said India has only paused military action against Pakistan. He added that terror and talks cannot go together. The Kurdish militant group PKK has announced it will disband and disarm as part of a peace initiative with Turkey. The historic decision follows 4 decades of armed conflict. Turkey's ruling AK party has said it was an important step towards a terror-free Turkey. President Trump will accept a Boeing 747-8 airplane as a gift from the Qatar royal family. It's believed the luxury aircraft will be converted to an Air Force One presidential plane and donated to Trump after he leaves office. The gift coincides with Trump's visit to Qatar this week. Opening statements in the sex trafficking trial of American rapper Sean Diddy Combs have begun in New York today. If convicted, the former music mogul could face life in prison. Combs has pleaded not guilty. His lawyer says all sex acts were consensual. And a power outage on the London Underground has caused a major travel disruptions across the city. A TfL spokesperson said everything shut down due to a national grid issue. They added that some people would have been stuck in tunnels and they were in the process of getting things back up and running once again. A reminder of our top stories. President Donald Trump prepares to travel to the Middle East to address a number of key global challenges, including new investments for the U.S. economy.
But he learned it in about 2 hours.
The visit comes as Hamas hand over U.S.-Israeli hostage Edan Alexander, believed to be the last living American hostage. President Zelensky challenges President Putin to meet face-to-face in Turkey to discuss ceasefire plans. And Wall Street surges as the U.S. strike a trade deal with China. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. The Riyadh deal with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next, followed by Counterpoints with Melinda Nusafora. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with a W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.